Welcome to the Biotech Executive Brief, your daily rundown of the developments shaping artificial intelligence, pharma and life sciences, and the broader business landscape. Each episode focuses on the specific news executives should have on their radar, from AI models and infrastructure to clinical development, regulatory decisions, deal-making, capital markets, and major shifts across the global economy. If you find these updates useful, subscribe to the Biotech Executive Brief to get daily updates on the industry and stay current on the developments that matter most. Today's brief covers Tuesday, August 25th, 2026. Let's start with artificial intelligence, where OpenAI is making a bigger move into the infrastructure underneath its model. OpenAI published the first performance results for Jalapeño, its custom AI inference chip. The initial benchmark showed higher throughput and improves power efficiency for inference workloads. This is significant because OpenAI is increasingly competing across the entire AI technology stack. The company also laid out that strategy more explicitly today, describing chips, computing infrastructure, models, and products as interconnected parts of its long-term approach. The logic is straightforward. If OpenAI can improve the economics at the chip and compute layers, those savings can ultimately lower the cost of delivering AI through models and applications. Jalapeño also puts OpenAI more directly into a race already involving Nvidia and a growing number of technology companies developing proprietary accelerators. And inference is becoming particularly important. Training frontier models requires enormous amounts of compute. But once those models are deployed to millions of users in enterprise applications, inference becomes an enormous recurring infrastructure cost. So custom silicon gives OpenAI another potential lever over both capacity and economics. Meanwhile, Nvidia is approaching another important test. Investors are watching the company's upcoming results and the rollout of its next-generation Rubin platform to determine whether extraordinary demand for AI infrastructure can continue. The question isn't necessarily whether companies want more AI computing capacity. Increasingly, it's whether customers can finance it. The cost of building new data centers has become so large that financing conditions are beginning to influence how quickly infrastructure can expand. That creates an interesting dynamic. AI demand can remain strong while the economics of satisfying that demand become more challenging. Anthropic is taking an extremely expansive view of the opportunity. The company is expected to tell investors that it sees more than $30 trillion in potential revenue opportunity across the industries and workflows AI could eventually address. $30 trillion is obviously an enormous figure, but the projection illustrates how frontier model companies are framing the market. They aren't positioning AI as another software category. They're increasingly presenting it as a technology layer capable of participating in economic activity across virtually every major industry. And we're seeing the enterprise side of that strategy become increasingly specialized. Google expanded Gemini Enterprise with capabilities designed specifically for lawyers and law firms. The new tools are intended to support legal research and professional workflows, moving Gemini deeper into a high-value vertical rather than relying exclusively on a general-purpose assistant. That continues an important trend in enterprise AI. The technology is becoming more industry-specific. Companies aren't simply asking employees to open a chatbot. AI providers are increasingly building capabilities around the actual workflows of lawyers, scientists, developers, financial professionals, and other specialized users. That pattern is spreading geographically, too. Mexican startup Primera launched publicly with a $12 million seed round aimed at bringing enterprise AI into major Latin American companies. Rather than focusing on consumer applications, Primera was targeting AI deployment inside existing operational workflows at large businesses. That gives us another indication that enterprise AI adoption is broadening well beyond the United States and Europe. There was also fresh financing for Stability AI. The developer behind Stable Diffusion raised $76 million, bringing its recent fundraising total to $232 million. Stability AI has been rebuilding its business while competing in an increasingly crowded generative media market. The financing shows that investor capital remains available for established generative AI platforms, but the challenge is increasingly about converting technology adoption into a durable business model. Another part of the AI market is moving beyond language and images entirely. Two researchers who had previously been courted to lead Jeff Bezos-backed Project Prometheus unveiled a new company focused on AI models designed to understand and simulate the physical universe. That's part of a growing push towards scientific AI and world models. Instead of primarily predicting the next word in a sequence, these systems are intended to reason about physics and the behavior of the real world. And finally, OpenAI reported disrupting a Russia-linked covert influence operation that was using AI to generate and promote geopolitical content around a fabricated think tank. OpenAI banned accounts associated with the campaign. The incident is another concrete example of generative AI being used for coordinated influence activity, and it puts monitoring and platform enforcement firmly alongside model development as an important part of AI governance. So today's AI picture stretches across the entire stack. OpenAI is building custom chips. Nvidia's Rubin rollout is testing the durability and financing of infrastructure demand. Anthropic is pitching an enormous economic opportunity. Google is moving Gemini into legal workflows. Primero is targeting enterprise adoption in Latin America. Stability AI raised new capital. Scientific AI is moving toward physical world models. And misuse of generative AI remains an active information security challenge. Now let's move into pharma and life sciences, where today's news is led by a major healthcare services acquisition and several important FDA developments. McKesson agreed to acquire Precision Medicine Group for approximately $2.25 billion. The deal adds clinical development and commercialization capabilities to McKesson's existing healthcare services portfolio. That's strategically interesting because McKesson is expanding further beyond its traditional role in pharmaceutical distribution and into more of the drug development lifecycle. Precision Medicine Group provides services supporting clinical development and commercialization, giving McKesson greater exposure to outsourced life sciences activity. There was also significant regulatory news in oncology. The FDA approved Jazz Pharmaceuticals' HER2 targeting bispecific antibody Ziihera for first-line treatment of HER2 positive gastric and gastroesophageal junction cancers. The first-line designation is important because it moves Ziihera into an earlier treatment setting with a substantially larger potential patient population. It's also another milestone for bispecific antibodies as they expand into commercially significant solid tumor markets. Johnson & Johnson secured a regulatory win as well. The FDA approved Imavi for warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia, marking the product's first label expansion. For J&J, that broadens the commercial opportunity for Imavi into another rare hematologic disorder. And it illustrates a familiar pharmaceutical growth strategy. Once a specialty medicine reaches the market, additional indications can significantly expand its long-term value. There was more uncertainty for Capricor Therapeutics. The FDA extended its review of the company's Duchenne muscular dystrophy cell therapy after Capricor submitted additional information following a negative advisory committee vote. The extension avoids an immediate rejection, but the regulatory outlook remains uncertain while the FDA evaluates the additional material. Advanced cell therapies continue to face a high evidentiary bar, and Capricor's situation is another example of how complicated the path from promising clinical results to regulatory approval can become. There was also a major biotech launch. Centivera emerged from stealth with backing from investors associated with Metsera and a licensing deal potentially worth up to $1.5 billion. The company is focused on inflammatory disease and is beginning life with a sizable strategic transaction already in place. That shows how investors continue concentrating capital around differentiated inflammation and immunology assets, even as financing remains selective elsewhere in biotech. AI also appears directly in today's pharma section. Lundbeck expanded its partnership with Eversana to apply AI more broadly across its U.S. commercial organization. The expanded agreement moves AI into areas including marketing, analytics, and operational workflows. That's an important example because much of the AI conversation in pharma has focused on drug discovery. Lundbeck's approach shows adoption moving further downstream into commercialization. AI isn't only being evaluated to find the next molecule. It's increasingly being used in the systems responsible for bringing existing products to physicians and patients. Clinical development produced a more complicated result for Bausch + Lomb. Its combination of Xiidra and Meebo failed to hit the primary endpoint in a phase 2 dry eye study. Despite that miss, Bausch + Lomb plans to move the combination into phase 3 based on other findings from the trial. That decision will make the next study particularly important as the company attempts to demonstrate that the broader data justify continued development despite the phase 2 primary endpoint failure. There were also signs that one of the largest US biotech hubs may finally be stabilizing. Massachusetts' biotechnology sector is showing signs of recovery after a multi-year downturn. IPO activity and venture investment have improved during 2026, although the rebound remains uneven. Early-stage financing and biotech employment are still weaker than the headline capital market numbers might suggest. So the story isn't that the biotech downturn is over. It's that parts of the financing environment are beginning to improve while other parts of the ecosystem remain under pressure. Diagnostics produced another development. LabCorp launched a new reflex testing approach designed to identify more patients with hepatitis D, one of the most severe forms of viral hepatitis. The goal is to reduce gaps in diagnosis and identify more patients who may need specialist evaluation and treatment. And we'll close the life sciences section with an important public health story. Pennsylvania reported 2 measles deaths, the first U.S. fatalities from the disease recorded in 2026. State officials said both individuals were unvaccinated. The deaths put renewed attention on measles prevention and vaccination as public health officials continue responding to cases across the country. So across pharma and life sciences today, McKesson is making a $2.25 billion expansion into clinical development and commercialization services. Jazz and Johnson & Johnson secured meaningful FDA approvals. Centivera launched with a potential $1.5 billion deal. Capricor remains in regulatory limbo. Lundbeck is scaling AI across commercial operations, and the biotech financing environment is showing some signs of recovery. Now let's finish with business. Trade tensions between the United States and Canada escalated again. Canada announced retaliatory tariffs covering approximately $20 billion of U.S. products after Washington imposed new tariffs on Canadian goods. The measures cover hundreds of products and increase uncertainty for supply chains spanning automotive manufacturing, metals, agriculture, and consumer goods. That trade uncertainty is arriving as U.S. consumers become more cautious. Consumer confidence fell in August to its lowest level in 7 months, with households reporting increased concern about employment conditions and the broader economic outlook. If that weakness persists, discretionary spending becomes an important area to watch. But individual consumer companies are telling very different stories. LEGO reported a 21% increase in first-half sales as World Cup and Formula One products attracted new customers. The company continued gaining market share despite the more uncertain consumer backdrop. Dick's Sporting Goods had a much more difficult update. The company lowered its full-year forecasts as weaker athletic footwear demand, excess inventory, and discounting at Foot Locker pressured performance. So within the same consumer environment, LEGO is producing double-digit growth, while athletic footwear is dealing with weaker demand and promotional pressure. There was also a major strategic shift at Siemens Energy. The company plans to sell most of its industrial division and focus more heavily on power grids and gas turbines. That portfolio shift connects directly back to the AI infrastructure story. Data centers and broader electrification are increasing electricity demand, making grid infrastructure and power generation increasingly strategic businesses. In other words, the AI investment cycle isn't only affecting chip companies. It's influencing how major industrial companies allocate capital. Oil provided some relief today. Prices fell more than 3% to a 1-week low as traders concluded that expanded U.S. sanctions against Iran were unlikely to materially disrupt near-term supply. That unwound some of the geopolitical premium that had accumulated in crude prices. Canadian banks also delivered stronger than expected results. Bank of Montreal and Bank of Nova Scotia both beat quarterly profit expectations, supported by capital markets activity. But both banks remain attentive to the economic consequences of escalating Canada-US trade tensions. Bitcoin, meanwhile, moved above $80,000 for the first time in more than 3 months. A weaker US dollar and concerns around currency debasement helped support demand for digital assets. Apple also had a new hardware announcement tied directly to AI. The company unveiled faster Mac Mini and Mac Studio systems aimed partly at users running AI agents and other compute-intensive workloads locally. That's another layer of the infrastructure market. Not every AI workload will necessarily live in a massive centralized data center. More capable workstation hardware could allow developers and businesses to run increasingly sophisticated models and agents locally. And markets broadly finished on a stronger note. Global equities advanced as technology shares rebounded ahead of Nvidia's earnings, while treasury yields and oil prices declined. Investors continue balancing enthusiasm around AI-linked growth with uncertainty around tariffs, inflation, and geopolitical risk. That wraps up the Biotech Executive Brief for Tuesday, August 25th, 2026. Across AI, OpenAI's Jalapeño chip puts custom silicon at the center of its full-stack strategy. Nvidia faces another major infrastructure demand test. Google is taking Gemini deeper into legal workflows. And AI development continues, expanding towards scientific models and international enterprise adoption. Across pharma and life sciences, McKesson announced a $2.25 billion acquisition of Precision Medicine Group. Jazz and Johnson & Johnson secured important FDA approvals. Centivera emerged with a potential $1.5 billion licensing deal. And Lundbeck is moving AI deeper into pharmaceutical commercialization. And across business, US-Canada trade tensions intensified, consumer confidence weakened, Lego delivered strong growth, Siemens Energy shifted toward power infrastructure, Bitcoin moved above $80,000, and technology stocks rebounded ahead of Nvidia earnings. If your organization is navigating AI, digital transformation, manufacturing technology, or technology strategy within life sciences, Sternbridge Technology Consulting helps biotech executives translate emerging technologies and industry developments into practical strategy and execution. Subscribe to the Biotech Executive Brief to stay current on the developments shaping artificial intelligence, pharma and life sciences, and the broader business landscape. Thanks for listening to the Biotech Executive Brief from Sternbridge Technology Consulting.